It's Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. I'm meteorologist Sarah Mitchell. Tropical storm Melissa is becoming a serious problem, and we need to talk about what's happening right now. This system is not behaving like we initially expected, and that's causing major concerns across multiple regions. I've been tracking this storm around the clock, and the developments over the past 24 hours have been significant. We're looking at a scenario that's becoming more complex by the hour, and I want to walk you through exactly what's unfolding and why this matters for everyone in the affected areas. Now, I don't throw around terms like serious problem lightly. When I use those words, it's because the data is showing us something that demands immediate attention. Melissa has been strengthening at a pace that's caught many off guard, and more importantly, the track forecast has shifted in ways that put more populated areas at risk. We're dealing with a storm that's finding every favorable condition it needs to intensify. And that's creating a cascade of impacts that extend far beyond the immediate storm center. Let me be clear about what we're seeing right now. Melissa is currently packing sustained winds of 65 miles per hour, and that puts us just 10 miles per hour away from hurricane status. But it's not just about the wind speeds. The pressure has been dropping steadily, and when we see that kind of pressure trend, it tells us the storm is tapping into energy sources that will fuel continued strengthening. The environment around Melissa is almost textbook perfect for tropical development, and that's what makes this situation so concerning. Water temperatures where Melissa is currently located are running exceptionally warm, sitting at around 29 degrees Celsius. That's about 84 degrees Fahrenheit, which is well above the threshold needed for tropical storm intensification. But here's what makes this even more problematic. The heat content beneath the surface is extraordinarily high. We're not just talking about warm water at the surface level. This warmth extends deep down into the ocean, creating what we call high oceanic heat content. When a storm moves over these conditions, it doesn't just get a quick energy boost. It gets sustained fuel that can power rapid intensification. The atmospheric pattern surrounding Melissa is equally concerning. Upper-level winds that would normally provide some shear to help weaken or limit the storm's development are virtually non-existent in the immediate area. We're looking at what meteorologists call a very conducive environment: low shear, warm waters, plenty of moisture, and atmospheric instability. These are the ingredients that can turn a manageable tropical storm into a major hurricane in a relatively short time frame. Now, let's talk about the track, because this is where things get really complicated. Earlier forecast models had suggested Melissa would take a more westward path, potentially impacting areas that have better infrastructure and hurricane preparedness systems in place. But the latest runs are showing a northward component that brings the storm much closer to densely populated coastal regions. This isn't just a minor adjustment in the forecast. We're talking about a fundamental shift that changes the entire risk profile for millions of people. The steering patterns in the atmosphere are setting up in a way that could cause Melissa to slow down significantly once it reaches a certain latitude. When tropical storms slow down, two things happen that make them exponentially more dangerous. First, they have more time to strengthen over those warm ocean waters I mentioned. Second, they dump massive amounts of rainfall over the same areas for extended periods. We could be looking at a scenario where Melissa parks itself offshore and just churns for days, getting stronger while pumping incredible amounts of moisture onshore. Current computer models are showing rainfall totals that are frankly alarming. We're looking at the potential for 8 to 12 inches of rain across widespread areas, with some localized spots potentially seeing upwards of 18 inches. When you're talking about those kinds of rainfall amounts, you're talking about catastrophic flooding potential. Rivers that normally handle heavy rain just fine will be overwhelmed. Urban drainage systems will be completely inadequate. Low-lying areas will become completely impassable. The storm surge threat is also evolving as Melissa continues to strengthen. Right now, we're forecasting surge levels of 3 to 5 feet above normal high tide levels along the most exposed coastlines. But if Melissa reaches hurricane status as expected, those numbers will increase significantly. Coastal communities that might feel relatively safe with current surge forecasts need to understand that this is a rapidly changing situation. Storm surge can increase dramatically with even modest increases in wind speed. What's particularly troubling about Melissa's current behavior is how it's defying some of the classic patterns we typically see with October storms. Usually, systems this late in the season encounter more hostile atmospheric conditions as they move north. Cooler water temperatures, increased wind shear, and stronger high-pressure systems typically act as natural brakes on storm development. But Melissa is moving through an atmospheric pattern that's more reminiscent of peak hurricane season conditions. The sea surface temperature anomalies in Melissa's path are running 2 to 3 degrees above normal for this time of year. That might not sound like much, but in the world of tropical meteorology, that's a massive difference. Those extra degrees of warmth translate directly into additional energy available for the storm to tap into. It's like adding high-octane fuel to an already powerful engine. Satellite imagery from the past 6 hours shows that Melissa is beginning to develop better organization in its core structure. The eye wall is starting to become more defined, and we're seeing the classic spiral banding patterns that indicate a maturing tropical cyclone. This organizational improvement is happening faster than many of the forecast models predicted, which suggests that Melissa has found an atmospheric sweet spot that's allowing for rapid development. Wind shear measurements in the vicinity of the storm have actually decreased over the past 12 hours, creating an even more favorable environment for strengthening. When wind shear decreases around a developing tropical system, it removes one of the key limiting factors that prevent rapid intensification. Combined with the exceptionally warm ocean temperatures and high moisture content in the atmosphere, Melissa now has all the ingredients it needs for significant strengthening. The pressure gradient around the storm is also tightening, which means the pressure differences between the storm center and the surrounding atmosphere are becoming more pronounced. This creates stronger pressure-driven winds and contributes to the overall intensity of the system. Current barometric pressure readings show a steady downward trend, and when we see sustained pressure drops like this, it's typically a precursor to rapid intensification events. Upper-level divergence patterns are also becoming more favorable for Melissa's continued development. This refers to how air moves away from the storm at high altitudes, creating a ventilation system that allows the storm to continue strengthening. Think of it like a chimney effect. The better the ventilation at the top, the more efficiently the storm can process the energy it's drawing from the warm ocean waters below. One of the most concerning aspects of Melissa's current situation is how all of these favorable factors are aligning simultaneously. In meteorology, we often see storms that have some favorable conditions, but are limited by others. Melissa is in a situation where virtually every atmospheric and oceanic parameter is supporting continued intensification. This creates the potential for what we call explosive development, where a storm can jump multiple categories in speed of Melissa is also a matter of hours, the forward becoming a critical factor in the developing threat. Current movement is around 8 miles per hour, which is relatively slow for a tropical system at this latitude. Slow-moving storms are inherently more dangerous because they have more time to intensify and they produce more rainfall over any given area. If Melissa continues to slow down, as forecast models suggest, we could be looking at a prolonged rainfall event that produces truly catastrophic flooding. The rainfall projections I'm seeing from the latest model runs are frankly staggering. We're looking at areas that could receive a month's worth of rain in just 48 hours. The Weather Prediction Center has already highlighted regions where flash flooding will be not just possible but likely. Urban areas with aging stormwater infrastructure are going to be particularly vulnerable. We're talking about the kind of rainfall rates that can turn streets into rivers in a matter of minutes. Now, I want to shift focus to the coastal impacts, because this is where Melissa is going to show its teeth. The National Hurricane Center has issued storm surge watches for approximately 200 miles of coastline, and those watches are likely to be upgraded to warnings within the next 12 hours. Storm surge is often the deadliest aspect of any tropical system, and with Melissa's current trajectory, we're looking at surge heights that could inundate areas well inland from the immediate shoreline. The bathymetry along the forecast impact zone is particularly concerning. We have shallow offshore waters that act like a funnel, concentrating and amplifying storm surge as it approaches the coast. Areas that might typically see 2 to 3 feet of surge could experience 6 to 8 feet with Melissa's current intensity and track. Barrier islands and low-lying coastal communities are facing the prospect of complete inundation. Tide timing is also working against us. Melissa's closest approach is forecast to coincide with the monthly high tide cycle. When you combine astronomical high tides with storm surge, you get what we call compound flooding. The surge doesn't just add to the normal, the interaction tide level. Between these two forces can create water levels that exceed the simple mathematical sum of both components. Let me walk you through what the models are showing for the next 72 hours. By tomorrow evening, Melissa should reach hurricane status. That's not speculation anymore. Every major forecast model is now showing this intensification. The question isn't whether it will become a hurricane, but how strong it will get and how quickly. The rapid intensification indices are lighting up across multiple forecast systems. The European model, which has been consistently reliable this season, is showing Melissa potentially reaching Category 2 status by Friday morning. The American GFS model is slightly more aggressive, suggesting Category 2 winds could be achieved by late Thursday night. Either scenario represents a significant escalation from where we are right now. What's particularly concerning is that both models show continued strengthening even after Melissa reaches hurricane status. Here's where the forecast gets really problematic. Around Friday afternoon, the steering currents that have been guiding Melissa northward are forecast to weaken considerably. This creates what we call a steering collapse scenario. When steering currents collapse, tropical systems can slow down dramatically or even stall completely. A stalled hurricane sitting over warm ocean waters is a recipe for disaster. The high-pressure ridge to the north is strengthening, creating what's essentially an atmospheric wall that will block Melissa's continued northward movement. At the same time, a trough of low pressure that might normally pull the storm out to sea is forecast to remain too far to the east to provide any meaningful steering influence. This leaves Melissa in a zone where it could meander for days. Rainfall accumulations in a stall scenario become truly frightening. Instead of the 8 to 12 inches I mentioned earlier, we could be looking at 15 to 25 inches of rain over the same areas. Some isolated locations could see even higher amounts. This isn't just flooding. This is the kind of rainfall that changes landscapes permanently. Rivers will cut new channels. Entire neighborhoods could be underwater for weeks. The wind threat is also escalating rapidly. Hurricane-force winds extend outward about 25 miles from Melissa's center right now, but that wind field is expanding. By the time Melissa reaches Category 2 status, hurricane-force winds could extend 50 or even 60 miles from the center. Tropical storm-force winds already extend nearly 100 miles from the center, and that envelope is growing with each satellite pass. Power outages are going to be widespread and prolonged. Utility companies are already pre-positioning crews and equipment, but the scale of the potential damage means restoration could take weeks in some areas. When you combine extended power outages with flooding, you create cascading infrastructure failures that affect everything from water treatment to hospitals to emergency services. The economic implications of Melissa are starting to become clear as well. Ports along the forecast track are already beginning to implement hurricane protocols. Shipping schedules are being disrupted. Airlines are canceling flights not just in the immediate impact zone, but across the entire region, as aircraft are repositioned to safer locations. The ripple effects of a major hurricane extend far beyond the areas that experience the actual storm. Evacuation planning is becoming more complex by the hour. The slow forward speed of the storm means evacuation windows are longer, which is good. But it also means the areas potentially affected are larger, which strains evacuation routes and shelter capacity. Emergency management officials are having to plan for scenarios where evacuees might need shelter for a week or more rather than the typical 2 to 3 days. Hospital systems are implementing their hurricane protocols. Patient transfers from vulnerable facilities to more secure locations are already underway in some areas. Medical equipment that can't be moved is being secured. Backup power systems are being tested and fuel reserves are being topped off. The healthcare implications of a major hurricane can persist for months after the storm passes. The agricultural sector is also bracing for significant impacts. October is a critical time for several crops, and the combination of hurricane-force winds and excessive rainfall could devastate entire growing regions. Livestock operations are particularly vulnerable. Moving large numbers of animals to safety is logistically challenging and expensive, but leaving them in place could result in massive losses. Looking at the broader atmospheric pattern, there's nothing on the horizon that suggests conditions will become less favorable for Melissa's continued development. The jet stream configuration is expected to remain relatively stable, maintaining the steering pattern that could keep Melissa in a hostile environment for coastal areas. Long-range models suggest this pattern could persist well into next week. Sea surface temperatures along Melissa's forecast track remain exceptionally warm. Even if the storm does begin to move more quickly eventually, it will be traversing waters that can support a major hurricane. There's no cooling influence that would naturally weaken the system. If anything, ocean heat content increases along portions of the forecast track. The official intensity forecast from the National Hurricane Center is calling for Melissa to reach Category 2 status, but I'm seeing indications that this might be conservative. Several intensity models are suggesting the potential for Category 3 development if the storm stalls as forecast. A Category 3 hurricane moving slowly or stalling near a populated coastline represents one of the worst-case scenarios in tropical meteorology. Communication systems are already showing strain in some areas as people try to coordinate evacuation plans and gather information. Cell towers have backup power, but that backup power has limits. Once we start seeing widespread power outages, communication becomes exponentially more difficult. Emergency services are preparing for scenarios where normal communication networks are compromised for extended periods. The psychological impact of a slow-moving major hurricane cannot be understated. Unlike fast-moving storms that create intense but relatively brief periods of extreme conditions, slow-moving systems subject communities' conditions to hurricane for extended periods. The stress on both individuals and institutions becomes cumulative and can lead to decision-making fatigue at precisely the time when critical decisions need to be made. Water management systems are already being adjusted in preparation for Melissa's arrival. Reservoirs are being drawn down where possible to create flood storage capacity. Coastal barriers and floodgates are being tested and prepared for deployment. These engineering solutions can help, but they have limits. When you're talking about the rainfall amounts Melissa could produce, even the best flood control infrastructure can be overwhelmed. Emergency management protocols across the region are being activated at levels we haven't seen in years. County emergency operations centers are moving to full activation status, bringing together representatives from law enforcement, fire services, public works, and health departments. These multi-agency coordination efforts are critical when dealing with a storm of Melissa's magnitude, but they also highlight just how serious this situation has become. The National Guard has been placed on standby in multiple states, ready to deploy for search and rescue operations, debris clearance, and security operations in affected areas. Guard units with high-water vehicles and aviation assets are being positioned strategically to respond quickly once conditions permit. The fact that these resources are being mobilized 48 hours before landfall tells you everything you need to know about the expected severity of this event. School districts across the potential impact zone are making difficult decisions about closures. Many have already announced that schools will be closed for the remainder of the week, with some extending closures into next week, depending on Melissa's track and intensity. These aren't just weather days. Districts are preparing for the possibility that some facilities could be damaged or that transportation routes could be impassable for extended periods. The insurance industry is also mobilizing resources on a scale that indicates they're expecting significant claims volume. Catastrophe response teams are being deployed to staging areas outside the forecast impact zone. Claims processing centers are being set up in advance. Insurance companies learned hard lessons from previous storms about the importance of rapid response, and the mobilization we're seeing suggests they expect Melissa to generate substantial losses. Fuel supplies are becoming a concern in many areas. Gas stations are seeing long lines as people fill up their vehicles and portable containers. Propane supplies for generators are running low at many retailers. This kind of panic buying creates its own problems, potentially leaving people without fuel when they actually need it most. Authorities are urging people to buy only what they need and to avoid hoarding. The marine environment is already responding to Melissa's presence. Wave heights have increased dramatically across the storm's path, with some buoys reporting waves in excess of 15 feet. These aren't just numbers on a chart. Large waves like this can cause significant coastal erosion even before the storm makes landfall. Beach communities that have spent years rebuilding after previous storms are watching their protective dune systems get hammered by the increased surf. Shipping and maritime operations have ground to a halt across a wide area. Container ships are seeking safe harbor or altering their routes to avoid Melissa's path. Offshore oil and gas operations are evacuating non-essential personnel and securing equipment. The Port of Miami, Port Everglades, and other major shipping hubs are implementing hurricane protocols that will effectively shut down operations for days. The aviation industry is feeling Melissa's impact well beyond the immediate forecast zone. Flight cancellations are cascading across the entire Southeast as airlines reposition aircraft and crews. Major airports are beginning to implement their hurricane preparedness plans, which include securing or relocating aircraft that can't be flown to safety. The economic impact of these flight disruptions extends far beyond the transportation sector. Urban flood control systems are being tested in ways they haven't experienced in years. Storm drains are being cleared of debris. Pumping stations are being inspected and backup power systems activated. But these engineered solutions have limits, and those limits are likely to be exceeded if Melissa delivers the rainfall amounts current models suggest. Cities that have invested millions in flood control infrastructure are about to find out whether those investments will hold up under extreme conditions. The storm's slow forward speed is creating planning nightmares for emergency managers. Typically, hurricane impacts are intense but relatively brief. Communities can hunker down for 12 to 18 hours and then begin recovery efforts. But with Melissa potentially stalling or moving very slowly, we could be looking at hurricane conditions persisting for 2 to 3 days, or even longer. That changes everything about emergency planning and resource allocation. Coastal erosion is already accelerating as Melissa's wave field impacts shorelines hundreds of miles from the storm center. Beach communities are watching decades of sand replenishment projects get undone in a matter of hours. The increased wave action is undermining seawalls and coastal structures that weren't designed to handle this kind of prolonged assault. Some areas may see permanent changes to their coastline configuration. The ecological impact of a slow-moving major hurricane like Melissa extends far beyond the immediate storm effects. Prolonged flooding can contaminate water supplies with agricultural runoff, industrial chemicals, and sewage. Saltwater intrusion can damage freshwater ecosystems miles inland. Wildlife populations that can't evacuate face mortality rates that can take generations to recover from. Temperature differentials across Melissa's circulation are becoming more pronounced, indicating that the storm is developing a more mature structure. The warm core of the system is intensifying while the outer bands maintain cooler temperatures. This temperature gradient drives the pressure differentials that create the storm's powerful winds. The more pronounced these gradients become, the stronger the storm gets. Melissa's interaction with the upper atmosphere is also becoming more efficient. Outflow channels at high altitudes are becoming better established, allowing the storm to exhaust warm air more effectively. This creates a positive feedback loop where better outflow allows for more intensive, low-level convergence, which feeds more energy into the storm system. It's like fine-tuning an engine to run more efficiently. The storm's eye is beginning to clear more consistently on satellite imagery, another sign of strengthening organization. A clear, well-defined eye indicates that the storm has achieved a mature tropical cyclone structure with efficient energy transfer from the ocean surface to the upper atmosphere. Once a storm develops this kind of organization, it becomes much more resistant to weakening factors. Convective activity within Melissa's core is intensifying, with towering thunderstorms reaching heights of over 50,000 feet. These massive thunderstorms act like chimneys, rapidly transporting heat and moisture from the ocean surface to the upper atmosphere. The more intense this convective activity becomes, the more efficiently the storm can process the energy available from warm ocean waters. The rainfall core of Melissa is expanding as the storm strengthens. What started as a relatively compact area of heavy rain is now spreading across a much larger area. This expansion means that communities well away from the storm's center will still experience significant rainfall impacts. Areas that might have thought they were safely outside the threat zone are now looking at the potential for serious flooding. Melissa's wind field continues to grow larger as the storm intensifies. Hurricane-force winds that were initially confined to within 20 miles of the center now extend 35 miles outward and are continuing to expand. This means that the area experiencing the most destructive winds is getting larger even as the storm gets stronger. More communities will face the prospect of catastrophic wind damage. The pressure gradient around Melissa is tightening further, with the latest aircraft reconnaissance mission recording a central pressure drop of 8 millibars in just 6 hours. Rapid pressure drops like this are often precursors to explosive intensification events. When the atmospheric pressure at a storm center drops quickly, it creates stronger pressure-driven winds throughout the system. Ocean heat content measurements along Melissa's forecast track continue to show exceptionally high values. The warm water isn't just at the surface, but extends down 200 feet or more in many areas. This deep warm water acts like a massive reservoir of energy that the storm can tap into for sustained periods. Even as Melissa churns up the ocean surface, it continues to find warm water to fuel its intensification. The wind shear environment around Melissa has become even more favorable over the past 12 hours. Upper-level winds that could disrupt the storm's structure have weakened further, removing virtually all atmospheric resistance to continued strengthening. When wind shear drops to near zero around a tropical system over warm water, rapid intensification becomes not just possible, but probable. Melissa's forward speed has decreased to just 6 miles per hour, and steering currents suggest it could slow even further over the next 24 hours. This slowdown is occurring exactly as forecast models predicted, but seeing it actually happen makes the threat more real and more immediate. A 6-mile-per-hour forward speed means Melissa will take nearly 4 hours to travel just 24 miles. The rainfall efficiency of the storm is increasing as its structure becomes more organized. Better organized storms are more effective at wringing moisture out of the atmosphere and converting that moisture into precipitation. The latest Doppler radar estimates suggest that rainfall rates within Melissa's core have increased by over 30% in the past 12 hours. Coastal water levels are already running above normal along hundreds of miles of shoreline due to Melissa's distant effects. Storm surge doesn't wait for landfall. The massive circulation of a major hurricane pushes water ahead of it, creating elevated water levels well in advance of the storm's arrival. Communities are seeing flooding during high tide cycles, even though Melissa is still days away. The interaction between Melissa and the jet stream pattern continues to evolve in ways that favor storm intensification and slow movement. A large ridge of high pressure over the eastern United States is strengthening, creating an atmospheric block that will prevent Melissa from moving quickly out to sea. At the same time, no significant trough is developing that could pull the storm northward and weaken it through increased shear. Satellite-derived wind estimates show that Melissa has already achieved sustained winds of 70 miles per hour in some areas of its circulation. These are winds just 4 miles per hour below hurricane strength. Given the current rate of intensification and the favorable environment, hurricane status appears imminent rather than just likely. The storm's cloud pattern continues to become more symmetric and better organized. Asymmetric storms tend to be less efficient at intensifying because energy is not optimally distributed around the circulation. As Melissa becomes more symmetric, it becomes more efficient at converting available energy into stronger winds and lower central pressure. Economic modeling suggests that each additional day Melissa spends as a major hurricane could add billions to the total damage estimate. Slow-moving storms cause exponentially more damage than fast-moving ones because they subject areas to destructive conditions for much longer periods. The difference between a 12-hour hurricane impact and a 48-hour impact isn't just twice the damage. It can be 10 times the damage or more. Emergency shelters are reaching capacity in some areas, even though mandatory evacuations haven't been issued yet. People are making their own decisions about when to leave, and many are choosing to err on the side of caution. This early evacuation actually helps emergency managers by spreading the load over time rather than creating massive traffic jams when mandatory evacuations are eventually issued. The storm's low-level circulation is becoming more compact and intense. A tighter circulation means that the pressure gradient becomes steeper, which drives stronger winds. It also means that the storm becomes more efficient at maintaining its intensity even if it encounters slightly less favorable conditions. Compact, intense storms are often the most dangerous because they can maintain their strength longer. Melissa's upper-level anticyclone is strengthening and expanding. This high-pressure area above the storm acts like a vacuum, sucking air upward from the lower levels and maintaining the storm's circulation. A strong, well-positioned anticyclone is essential for major hurricane development. The fact that Melissa's anticyclone is both strengthening and growing larger suggests continued intensification is highly likely. The temperature contrast between Melissa's eye and eye wall is becoming more pronounced. A warm eye surrounded by very cold cloud tops in the eye wall is the signature of an intense tropical cyclone. Current satellite-derived temperature measurements show this contrast increasing, which correlates directly with strengthening winds and dropping central pressure. Ocean mixing beneath Melissa is not significantly cooling the surface waters, indicating that the heat content extends very deep. Normally, the powerful winds of a hurricane churn up cooler water from below, which can limit intensification. But in Melissa's case, the warm water extends so deep that this mixing is actually bringing more warm water to the surface, rather than cooling it. The storm's outflow pattern is becoming more efficient and extensive. Strong outflow at the upper levels allows more air to be drawn into the storm at lower levels, which intensifies the circulation. Melissa's outflow channels now extend over 500 miles from the storm center, creating a massive atmospheric exhaust system that supports continued strengthening. Rainfall rates within 50 miles of Melissa's center are now consistently exceeding 2 inches per hour. These aren't brief downpours, but sustained heavy rainfall that has been ongoing for hours. Areas experiencing these rainfall rates are already seeing significant flooding, even though the storm hasn't reached peak intensity yet. The National Hurricane Center's latest aircraft reconnaissance mission found that Melissa's central pressure has dropped to 985 millibars, down from 994 millibars just 12 hours earlier. A pressure drop of 9 millibars in 12 hours indicates rapid intensification is already occurring. If this rate continues, Melissa could reach major hurricane status much sooner than originally forecast. Wind field expansion is accelerating beyond what most intensity models predicted for this stage of development. We're now seeing tropical storm force winds extending outward nearly 120 miles from Melissa's center, and that envelope continues to grow with each passing hour. This expansion means communities that thought they might escape the worst impacts are now firmly within the threat zone. Areas that were planning for tropical storm conditions are now looking at the potential for hurricane-force winds. The atmospheric river effect is beginning to establish itself ahead of Melissa's circulation. This creates a continuous pipeline of tropical moisture streaming northward, setting up areas hundreds of miles from the storm center for excessive rainfall. Even locations that won't experience the core of the hurricane are going to deal with flooding rains that could persist for days. This moisture transport mechanism is already visible on water vapor satellite imagery. Doppler radar velocity, data from the latest reconnaissance aircraft, shows that Melissa's maximum sustained winds have reached 73 miles per hour. We have officially crossed the hurricane threshold. This isn't just a milestone on paper. Hurricane status means we're now dealing with a fundamentally different and more dangerous weather system. The organizational improvements we've been tracking have translated directly into stronger winds and more intense circulation. The eye wall replacement cycle that many storms undergo during intensification has not occurred with Melissa, which is actually bad news. Eye wall replacement typically causes temporary weakening as storms reorganize their core structure. The fact that Melissa has maintained a single contracting eye wall means there's been no natural break on its intensification process. The storm has been able to strengthen continuously without the interruptions that might have slowed its development. Convective bursts within the eye wall are becoming more frequent and more intense. These are sudden eruptions of extremely deep thunderstorms that can cause rapid pressure drops and wind increases over very short time periods. Satellite imagery shows these convective bursts occurring every 2 to 3 hours now, each one contributing to the storm's continued strengthening. This pattern suggests Melissa is in an environment that strongly supports rapid intensification. The storm's forward motion has slowed to just 5 miles per hour, and steering analysis suggests it could slow even further before potentially stalling completely. At 5 miles per hour, Melissa will take nearly 5 hours to travel just 25 miles. This crawling pace maximizes the time the storm spends over warm ocean waters, while also maximizing the duration of impacts for any area in its path. Slow-moving hurricanes are exponentially more destructive than fast-moving ones. Ocean heat content anomalies along Melissa's forecast track are running 3 to 4 degrees above normal for late October. These aren't just surface temperature anomalies, but represent excess heat stored throughout the water column. This excess heat provides a virtually unlimited energy source for continued intensification. Even if Melissa were to encounter some unfavorable atmospheric conditions, the oceanic environment would support maintaining intensity. The pressure tendency at Melissa's center continues to show steady deepening. The latest dropsonde data indicates the central pressure has fallen to 982 millibars, representing a drop of 12 millibars in 18 hours. Pressure drops of this magnitude indicate that the storm is efficiently converting available energy into more intense circulation. When pressure falls this rapidly, wind speeds typically follow with similar rapid increases. Melissa's spiral bands are becoming more tightly wound and better defined on satellite imagery. This tightening spiral structure is characteristic of intensifying hurricanes and indicates that the storm's circulation is becoming more efficient. Better organized spiral bands mean more efficient moisture transport into the storm's core, which feeds the convective processes that drive intensification. The temperature gradient between the storm's core and its environment is increasing, providing more energy for continued strengthening. Satellite-derived temperature measurements show the eye warming while the surrounding cloud tops continue to cool. This temperature contrast is the fundamental driver of tropical cyclone intensity, and the increasing contrast suggests Melissa has significant potential for additional strengthening. Upper-level divergence patterns continue to be exceptionally favorable for Melissa's development. Strong divergence aloft acts like a vacuum, pulling air upward from the storm's core and maintaining the low pressure that drives the system's circulation. Current analysis shows divergence values well above the threshold typically associated with rapid intensification. This pattern is expected to persist for at least the next 36 hours. The storm's rain shield continues to expand as the circulation strengthens. Heavy rainfall is now occurring across an area spanning over 300 miles in diameter. This expansion means that flooding impacts will affect a much larger area than just the immediate landfall zone. Communities well inland from the coast are now facing the prospect of significant river flooding as this massive rainfall shield approaches. Coastal water levels continue to rise along the forecast impact area as Melissa's circulation pushes water ahead of the storm. Tide gauges are showing water levels running 1 to 2 feet above normal high tide predictions, and this is still with the storm center over 200 miles offshore. As Melissa continues to strengthen and move closer, these water level anomalies will increase dramatically. Some areas could see storm surge values of 8 to 12 feet above normal high tide levels. The wind shear environment around Melissa has become even more conducive to intensification. Over the past 6 days, disrupt the storm's structure have diminished hours. Upper-level winds that coolish to less than 5 knots, creating essentially zero shear conditions. When a tropical cyclone encounters zero shear over warm water with high heat content, rapid intensification becomes not just possible, but highly probable. All atmospheric resistance to strengthening has been removed. Melissa's low-level inflow is strengthening and becoming more organized. Stronger inflow means more energy is being transported into the storm's core, which directly translates to higher wind speeds and lower central pressure. Surface wind analyses show inflow velocities have increased by over 15% in the past 12 hours. This strengthening inflow is one of the most reliable indicators of continued intensification. The storm's outflow jets are becoming more pronounced and extensive. These high-altitude wind streams carry away the air that's processed through the storm's core, maintaining the pressure gradient that drives the surface circulation. Melissa's outflow jets now extend over 600 miles from the storm center and are strengthening. More efficient outflow allows for more intense low-level convergence, creating a positive feedback loop that supports rapid strengthening. Satellite microwave imagery shows that Melissa's eye wall is contracting, another sign of intensification. A smaller eye wall typically means stronger winds because the same amount of rotational energy is concentrated into a smaller area. The eye wall diameter has decreased from about 25 miles to approximately 18 miles over the past 12 hours. This contraction process usually precedes significant wind speed increases. The storm's inner core is showing signs of developing concentric eye walls, which could lead to an eye wall replacement cycle. However, current analysis suggests this process, if it occurs, won't happen for at least 24 hours. This timing would allow Melissa to continue strengthening until it's very close to or over land, maximizing the potential impact on coastal communities. Ocean surface roughness beneath Melissa is not inhibiting heat transfer from the ocean to the atmosphere. Normally, very rough seas can reduce the efficiency of heat transfer, acting as a natural governor on storm intensity. But current conditions show that heat flux from ocean to atmosphere remains at near maximum efficiency. This means Melissa can continue to extract energy from the ocean at an optimal rate. The atmospheric pattern supporting Melissa's slow movement is becoming more entrenched. A strong ridge of high pressure over the southeastern United States continues to strengthen, creating an increasingly solid barrier to northward movement. Computer models show this ridge persisting and even amplifying over the next several days. This means the stalling scenario we've been discussing is becoming more likely rather than less likely. Rainfall estimates from the storm's core continue to increase as the circulation intensifies. Doppler radar analysis suggests peak rainfall rates within 30 miles of the center are now approaching 4 inches per hour. These are flash flood emergency rainfall rates that can turn small streams into raging torrents in minutes. Areas experiencing these rainfall rates will see catastrophic flooding regardless of their normal flood resistance. The storm's asymmetric structure is becoming more symmetric, which typically leads to more efficient intensification. Asymmetric storms waste energy because their circulation isn't optimally organized. As Melissa becomes more symmetric, more of the available energy gets converted into stronger winds and lower pressure rather than being lost to atmospheric friction and turbulence. Melissa's convective available potential energy values in the surrounding environment remain exceptionally high. This measurement indicates how much energy is available in the atmosphere for thunderstorm development. High values support the intense convection that drives tropical cyclone intensification. Current readings are well above the 95th percentile for this region and time of year. The storm's momentum is beginning to overcome the steering currents that have been guiding its movement. Large, intense hurricanes can become somewhat independent of the atmospheric flow that would normally steer them. This phenomenon, known as beta drift, could cause Melissa to deviate from forecast tracks in unpredictable ways. It's another factor that makes this storm particularly challenging to forecast accurately. Sea surface height anomalies ahead of Melissa continue to build as the storm's circulation pushes water northward and westward. These elevated water levels create a pre-existing flood condition that will be amplified when the storm surge arrives. Coastal areas that might normally handle moderate storm surge will be overwhelmed when that surge is added to water levels that are already running 2 to 3 feet above normal. The storm's kinetic energy content has increased dramatically as the wind field has expanded and intensified. Kinetic energy is a measure of the total energy contained in the storm's circulation. Higher kinetic energy storms are more resistant to weakening factors and can maintain their intensity longer when they encounter less favorable conditions. Melissa's kinetic energy content has more than doubled in the past 24 hours. Atmospheric moisture content around Melissa continues to increase as the storm's circulation draws in water vapor from an increasingly large area. Higher moisture content supports more intense rainfall and helps maintain the convective processes that drive intensification. Precipitable water values around the storm are now running 200 to 300% of normal for late October. The storm's heating efficiency continues to improve as its structure becomes more organized. Heating efficiency measures how effectively a storm converts latent heat energy into kinetic energy. More efficient storms intensify faster and maintain their intensity better. Current calculations suggest Melissa's heating efficiency has improved by over 25% since yesterday. Melissa's interaction with the surrounding atmospheric flow is creating a feedback mechanism that supports both intensification and slow movement. The storm's outflow is reinforcing the ridge pattern that's causing the slow movement, while the slow movement allows more time over warm water for intensification. This positive feedback loop could maintain both the intensity and the problematic slow forward speed. The storm's tangential wind profile shows classic signs of a mature, intensifying hurricane. Wind speeds increase smoothly from the outer circulation toward the eye wall, then drop sharply in the eye itself. This profile indicates that the storm has achieved optimal organization for converting available energy into rotational motion. Storms with this wind profile typically continue strengthening until they encounter unfavorable conditions. Convective inhibition values around Melissa have dropped to near zero, meaning there are no atmospheric factors preventing thunderstorm development. When convective inhibition is low or absent around a tropical cyclone, any available energy immediately gets converted into convective activity that supports intensification. Current atmospheric soundings show virtually no resistance to convection anywhere within 200 miles of the storm center. The storm's warm core structure continues to strengthen and deepen. A stronger warm core means more efficient energy conversion and typically translates to lower surface pressure and higher wind speeds. Temperature anomalies in Melissa's core are now running 8 to 10 degrees above the environmental average at multiple atmospheric levels. This deep, warm core structure is characteristic of major hurricanes. Ocean mix layer depth beneath Melissa remains very shallow, meaning the warm water extends only to relatively shallow depths before encountering much cooler water. Normally, this would limit intensification as the storm churns up cooler water. However, heat content in this shallow mixed layer is so high that even the mixing is bringing warm water to the surface rather than cooling it. The storm's eye is continuing to clear and become more well-defined on both visible and infrared satellite imagery. A clear, symmetric eye indicates that the storm has achieved mature tropical cyclone structure with efficient energy transfer mechanisms. The eye diameter has stabilized at about 15 miles, which is optimal for maximizing wind speeds in the surrounding eye wall. Melissa's spiral band structure shows increasing organization, with bands becoming more distinct and persistent. Well-organized spiral bands are more efficient at transporting moisture and energy into the storm's core. The outer bands are also becoming more electrically active, with lightning frequency increasing significantly over the past 12 hours. Increased lightning activity often precedes rapid intensification events. The atmospheric river pattern ahead of Melissa is intensifying and becoming more focused. This river of moisture is already producing heavy rainfall over areas that won't see the storm's core for another 2 to 3 days. Precipitable water values along this moisture transport corridor are running 3 to 4 standard deviations above normal. This pattern will cause flooding problems well in advance of Melissa's arrival. Storm relative flow patterns show that Melissa is ingesting increasingly large amounts of low-level moisture while efficiently exhausting processed air at upper levels. This flow pattern is textbook for a rapidly intensifying hurricane. The inflow layer has deepened and strengthened, while the outflow layer has become more extensive and better organized. The pressure gradient force around Melissa continues to intensify as the central pressure drops and the storm circulation becomes more compact. Stronger pressure gradients drive higher wind speeds through the fundamental relationship between pressure differences and atmospheric motion. Current pressure gradient calculations suggest wind speeds could increase by another 15 to 20 miles per hour over the next 18 hours. Melissa's track forecast uncertainty continues to decrease for the next 48 hours, but increases significantly beyond that time frame. While we have high confidence in the storm's general direction and slow forward speed over the next 2 days, the potential stalling scenario creates enormous uncertainty about where the storm will be 4 to 5 days from now. This uncertainty makes evacuation planning extremely challenging for emergency managers. The storm's rainfall efficiency is approaching maximum theoretical values for a tropical cyclone in this environment. Rainfall efficiency measures how much of the available moisture gets converted to precipitation. Higher efficiency means more intense rainfall rates and greater flood potential. Melissa is now operating at near optimal efficiency for converting atmospheric moisture into rainfall. Satellite-based intensity estimates from multiple agencies are converging on sustained winds of 80 to 85 miles per hour. This represents a 15-mile-per-hour increase in just 18 hours. The Dvorak technique, advanced Dvorak technique, and satellite consensus methods are all showing similar intensification trends. When multiple independent analysis methods agree, it increases confidence in the intensity assessment. The storm's angular momentum is increasing as both the wind speeds and the size of the circulation grow. Higher angular momentum makes storms more resistant to disruption from external factors like wind shear or dry air intrusion. Melissa's angular momentum has increased by over 40% since yesterday, indicating that the storm is becoming more resilient to potential weakening factors. Ocean heat flux calculations show that Melissa is extracting energy from the ocean at rates typically associated with major hurricanes. Heat flux is the transfer of thermal energy from the warm ocean surface to the overlying atmosphere. Higher heat flux rates provide more energy for intensification. Current measurements show heat flux values in the 95th percentile for tropical cyclones in this region. The storm's low-level relative vorticity continues to increase as the circulation becomes more concentrated and intense. Relative vorticity measures the spin of air parcels relative to the Earth's rotation. Higher vorticity values indicate stronger circulation and typically correlate with higher wind speeds. Melissa's core vorticity has increased by over 50% in the past 24 hours. Melissa's interaction with upper-level trough systems remains minimal, allowing unimpeded intensification. Trough interactions typically cause wind shear and can disrupt tropical cyclone structure. The absence of significant trough influence means Melissa can continue strengthening without atmospheric interference. Long-range forecasts show no significant trough systems approaching the storm's vicinity for at least the next 5 days. The storm's helicity values continue to increase, indicating stronger rotational motion throughout the atmospheric column. Helicity combines both wind speed and directional shear into a single measure of atmospheric rotation. Higher helicity values support more intense convection and typically lead to stronger tropical cyclones. Current helicity measurements around Melissa are in the top 10% of historical values for this region. Potential vorticity analysis shows that Melissa has developed a well-defined warm core structure that extends through the entire troposphere. This deep, warm core is essential for major hurricane intensity and indicates that the storm has achieved optimal thermodynamic efficiency. The potential vorticity anomaly associated with Melissa is now among the strongest observed in the Atlantic Basin this season. The storm's outflow temperature continues to decrease while inflow temperature increases, indicating more efficient heat engine operation. This temperature contrast drives the storm's circulation through the same principles that power any heat, the temperature difference engine. The greater between heat source and heat sink, the more efficiently the engine operates. Melissa is currently operating as a highly efficient atmospheric heat engine. Eddy flux convergence around the storm's core is intensifying, concentrating more energy into a smaller area. Eddy flux convergence is a measure of how effectively a storm concentrates atmospheric energy. Higher convergence values typically lead to more rapid intensification. Current measurements show convergence rates that are well above the threshold typically associated with rapid intensification events. Melissa has crossed into hurricane territory and shows no signs of slowing down. We're looking at a storm that has every advantage nature can provide, sitting over record warm waters with virtually no atmospheric resistance to continued strengthening. The slow forward motion we've been tracking is becoming reality, and that combination of strengthening and stalling creates the absolute worst-case scenario for any coastal area in this storm's path. I'll be monitoring Melissa around the clock and putting out updates as conditions continue to evolve. If you're in the potential impact zone, now is the time to finalize your preparations and heed any evacuation orders from local officials. This is not a storm to ride out. Stay safe out there.